seen me after Moodle Moot. All right, without further ado, let's get going. I'm going to switch over to our presenting layout now. So for those of you who are playing penguins, we're going to move along. And before we get too far along, I know we've only got a few people in here, and that's fine. I actually prefer with a smaller crowd. Oh, good Lord, no, Richard, I never have joke competitions with Julian. I would just get slaughtered. I've got a poll in the middle of the page here. I'm just about to move it up to the middle so it's a little bit easier to see. And I love that 2 people have already gone. They're multitasking champions of the universe. That's pretty much what I select too. Give it a couple of minutes so everyone gets a chance to fill it out, and I think we're nearly there. Julian would win. So as Shane rightly said, today we're talking about influencing learning, which is something of a passion with me. And I guess what I really wanted to bring out in this presentation, or more this discussion, is the role that reports can play in that kind of influence. Sorry, I've got chirping happening in the background because I'm at iMoot Central for the Sydney office. We've got screens aplenty happening here. I have published the votes. They're just taking a little while to get up. Lots of multitasking champions here. Fantastic. So I'm going to close that one. We've got tinkerers, all-rounders, 1 admitted system administrator. Thank you, Jane. At least someone's taking it seriously. The reason for asking that poll, though, was to get a bit of a sense of the kind of audience I've got here. And I suspect, given I know most of you have got a really strong background with Moodle, that most of what I'm going to be discussing here, you already know the how-tos, which is great because I really want to focus on the why-tos. So close this one off now and hide it so it's out of the road. We'll come back to it. We've got one other one before I get started. There we go. Last one, folks, and then I'll stop polling you to death. I'd actually want to get a feel for how many of you know what reports are available in Moodle, because it's kind of central information. And what I've found in my experience with consulting with teachers is that many of them don't know what reports are available system-wide. And getting a feel there, we've got some people who know the course reports really well, which is great, but only a few. Oh no, results are coming in. I'm being beaten on numbers. A few people know the system-wide reports, and that's kind of what we want to focus on today. Couple more seconds and we'll publish the results from that one and then get on with the show. Yep. Sorry folks, my Adobe Connect unskills are bringing me unstuck. I mentioned when we were in the lobby that I had a really good reason for missing out on some of the presentations. I've actually just been away in Bhutan and arrived back in Australia yesterday, so I took this idea to a conference called the International Society for Teachers in Education Conference, and basically what they do is bring people together once a year to review ideas, provide research expertise, really collegially and constructively help build on research. And I'm the first person to admit my research skills can use a little bit of brushing up. So I really appreciated a lot of the feedback I got on this idea, and we'll talk more about that towards the end of this presentation. Cool. Okay, so let's close this one now and get on with the show. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so what we've got here is a Prezi presentation that I've downloaded, and we're going to step through it slowly. If This creates lag. Can you please let me know in the chat? If I drop out, let me know in chat. I'll try and make sure that I don't go too fast or too slow for anybody. So what we're looking at is influencing learning. Is this an administrator's role? In my experience, and I'm more than happy to be challenged on this, but my experience with consulting over the past year with Pukunui has been that most system administrators don't see it as their role to influence learning. They see it more as their role to set up the system so the teachers can go and do what they need to do. And once the system's set up, their role then becomes making sure that it stays stable, that everything functions properly. So I guess what I want to draw your attention to is what's the right way to teach. If we're going to talk about influencing learning, maybe we need to get an idea of what the right way to teach is. Personally, I think this is a bit of a furphy. Because as far as I'm concerned, the right way to teach is the way that works in your particular context. And that can be different depending on your circumstances. Personally, I love reflective learning, but I have a very good colleague who works with TAFE courses for electricians or apprentice electricians, who makes the very convincing argument that he doesn't really want them reflecting on what voltage is and how dangerous it might be. He wants them to know it. So if we say that the right way to teach is the way that works for your context, how do we know whether the way we teach is actually working for our context or not? So how do we know what that right way is? Because when we get into a classroom, we know it. We see it. It's easy. Our students tell us with their body language whether they're engaged or not. And frequently that's not that difficult to see. That image there is actually one of my favourite ones of learning, because you see it happen in every classroom you walk into. Students will help each other as they go along, and I love seeing it when I'm doing training sessions. You know, they'll see two heads come together and, oh, what did she say, or where did she go? And frequently that's because I go just a little bit too fast with my training, but that's neither here nor there. We know good engagement and good learning when we see it happening in front of us. It becomes fairly intuitive, but it's a little tricky when we take that online because it's not so easy to see. So what we're talking about then is being able to track it, and reports is a wonderful way of doing that. What I worry about though when we introduce reports, and what a lot of teachers worry about when we talk about reporting, is that we lose that human aspect. If we get so caught up in the statistics, we can start forgetting that there are real human beings at the end of it. So when I talk about reports, I do want to point out what it is that we're measuring. Because it's an online system, essentially we're measuring clicks, and those clicks may be categorized by various other fields or connectors, but what we're measuring is where people click and how often they click and where they've come from to get to where they are. And that's not necessarily an indication of engagement. It's not a set in stone rule, I guess is what I'm trying to point out. One of my favorite reports, and the one that I want to focus on with this presentation, is the site-wide course overview reports. Quick show of hands, who's actually used these before? Are you awake? Are you there? Thanks, Teresa. Okay, in case people didn't hear the question, thanks, Gareth. I know people are awake. I also know that it's different time zones around the world, so thank you. It took me a little while to get used to Adobe Connect as well, Richard, so that's all good. We've got 3 people maybe who've actually used the course overview reports before. Which is good, because that's about the numbers I'm used to having in these kinds of presentations. Even when we run the Moodle Managers course, most people haven't heard of the course overview reports before. So what we want to look at, for starters, this is where you access it from your own Moodle site. So if you have administrator access, you can get to the course overview reports. And this is why this presentation kind of takes a look at, well, is this an administrator's role? Being able to look at these reports and then use them within an institution. We're talking about 4 different varieties here. Your Common or Garden course overview report is just most active. Most active courses weighted. Instead of taking this kind of bulk lot of numbers, we start weighting them by the number of students within a course. But the participatory course reports are, for me, the most interesting. Views post is my favourite, but we'll come to that in a moment. This is an example of a most active courses course report. Now, I do want to highlight here, these are really just dummy courses. This is from a training session I ran a couple of months ago now, so these courses were run over 2 days. What you're looking at is the data from 2 days worth of clicks with people being trained in these courses. So there's nothing spectacular happening here, they're more just a visual representation. Richard, I can totally empathise with your internet dropping in and out. Travelling for the last 3 days has meant my internet connection has been dodgy at best, so I'll see you when you come back in, it's all good. What we're looking at here with the most active course reports, if you have a look at the statistics, we've got the name of the course and the activity. The activity is purely the number of clicks that were made in that course. Oh no, don't say it's not at your end, Teresa. I'll keep going on and hope that it doesn't drop in and out too much, but do let me know if you're missing huge lots of things. Okay, very good. The number of clicks that are happening within a course isn't necessarily a great way to judge whether that course is being particularly engaging, because we could have the teacher doing a lot of building work at that time. So you'll notice these reports aren't threaded out in roles, it's purely just the number of clicks that are happening in there. If we move along a little bit, we can see the most active courses with weighted. And what's particularly useful about this is the activity per user number. So that gives you a little bit better baseline. If you've got a course that has only a few people in it, but lots of activity, you're getting a really good amount of busyness happening there. But notice again, it's busyness. You do need to take a closer look at what's happening to get a feel for whether it's engaging. Moving right along. So these are our first 2 reports with the statistics beside each other. What I love about our activity per user one is we actually get a feel for how many users are in those courses. Which means if you've got a really big course that's got a lot of activity, you still get it scaled back to this activity per user figure. It gives you a much better way of comparing across the courses that you're running. So if you've got small courses and big courses, this is a better baseline figure to use. In my opinion, I'm extremely opinionated and more than happy to be challenged. Most participatory courses, this took me a full long weekend to sit down and really nut out with the help of a PHP programmer sitting beside me. A lot of these reports look simple on the surface, but I tend to really want to make sure that I understand how they're being created. So I went back through the code to see what participation actually meant in terms of coding. What we've got here, and you'll notice the names of the courses down the bottom are changing based on which report type we're using. So active can mean different things depending on which of these reports we're actually using. If we look a little bit further into the numbers, again, we can see how many active users we've got here. Notice the difference between the number of users and the number of active users. This I really like, because instead of dividing that whole number of activity by just the number of users in the course, we're starting to get a more fine-tuned number here. Only 2 people were active here. Only 4 out of 137 were active in the home course. That's not really what we're after. So that previous report, activity per users, could give us a bit of a wrong view of this course. What I'm finding with using these reports is it's really helpful to run each one and compare across these numbers to get a feel. This participation ratio is purely the number of clicks divided by the number of users, so it's very similar to active courses. This one is actually my favourite though. Most participatory courses, views divided by posts. This takes passive activity and divides it by active activity. Is that making sense to people? And I'm watching the chat to make sure I'm getting some responses here. Exactly, Teresa. Those not doing anything and not having any sort of impact. And that's what we want. We want to try and fine tune this down so we're seeing what activity is actually happening within that. A view for Moodle in this particular context is when something has been opened to be looked at. Now, it's most easily seen when you're looking at something like a forum activity where a post has been viewed if it's opened, it's been posted if someone actually wrote something or added something. This particular report drove me nuts trying to look through the code. So I'm giving a very brief overview of it here because I don't particularly want any of you to have to go through that frustration I went through trying to break it down a bit. So let's have a look at the numbers on this one, just as soon as Lindy gets her cursor working. This one I like. Our participation ratio is a lot easier to determine here because we can see passive versus active activity. Instead of combining everything as if you've been in there and clicked something, you've been active, this is starting to really tailor it down for engagement purposes. And for that reason, it's my favourite report. Yes, I'm biased. I do have favourites. So all the statistical data is a really good measure of thumb, but I mentioned before, it's not tailored down by role. And yes, if we wanted to go customizing reports, we could do that. Moodle being open source, one of its greatest strengths is if we notice a weakness with it, we can improve it and build on it. And I love it for that. But what I'm trying to focus on in this particular presentation is what it can do by default. If a particular teacher wanted to nut this out a little bit further within their own course, they can go in and see which students are being most active. So if you've noticed as an administrator, a couple of courses keep coming up as being either really active or really inactive, it's worth your time to go and look into those individual courses and see what students are doing. And you may want to do that with the teacher concerned, or you may want to do that as a sort of neutral observer, just seeing how the system is being used. And this is where we kind of move into storytelling role for a moment, folks. Again, just a brief comparison between those two reports we've seen. What I do want to draw your attention to with this is the participation ratio. The column is called the same, but the ratio is worked out in completely different ways. So with this report over to the right, it's worked out by dividing posts by views. With the one on the left, I would love to say it's worked out by dividing active users by users, but it's not quite accurate. I'm actually not going to tell you how that one's worked out because it would take me an age to explain it. It took me an age going through the code. Suffice to say, this one is roughly based on the number of users versus the number of activity. More, ask Peter. What I do want to focus on though is how do we use what we measure? So we could take this statistical analysis and start singling people out going, your course is really, really active. That means you must be doing really good stuff. Your course is really inactive. It must mean that you're doing really poorly. And that would be really, really bad. To use statistical data that way to single out staff members without actually giving it any sort of empathetic analysis is not what these reports are meant for, in my view. When we're looking at how we use what we measure, we need to keep a bit of a story in mind. I'm going to talk very briefly in a moment about influencer, but before I get to that, to me these reports are significant because they allow an administrator to start influencing how Moodle is being used at an institution. I can't remember who's responsible for this quote, but with great knowledge comes great responsibility. And with those reports, we have access to great knowledge on how our system is being used across the institution. And we should be using that. But most administrators that I've come across will pull up short and go, oh, well, that's not really my role. So if you're an administrator at your institution, you may want to consider, if it's not your role, is there someone who has that role at the institution? And if there is, create a role for them in Moodle so they can access those reports and actually make use of that data. And if there's not, maybe it's time to talk to some of the executive members around the institution and see about, well, how do we use this to improve our processes? Or even just to validate that the processes that we're using are actually good practice for us. I've mentioned before, I'm a consultant with Pukunui, so part of my role is going out and helping organisations work out whether Moodle's working the best way it can for them. With this kind of information to hand, you can work that out for yourself, which I think is fantastic. So I'm going to tell a bit of an anecdote now. You'll notice in the files pod, there's a PDF called Finding the Leaders and the Lost. This was actually the paper I presented in Bhutan last week, and this anecdote that I'm about to retell is pulled from that paper. So not long after I joined Pukunui, Julian retold a story of a client that he'd worked with many years before. An IT manager at a school, really keen to get Moodle up and working for the school, really keen to help out as much as possible, because we all know when we introduce new systems, we get a lot of resistance to change. This person was really keen to make sure there was none of that, that he was going to be addressing all that resistance and any issues that came up as soon as they came along. And he tripped over these reports in Moodle, which was really fortuitous. Looking at those reports, he picked the 2 top courses, so the 2 that had the most activity and engagement happening in them, and the 2 bottom ones. And he contacted the teachers responsible for each of them and went, would you mind having morning tea with me? I'd really like to get some feedback on what's happening with Moodle, the way you're using it. I really, I'm here to support you. I want to make sure that this works. And of course, they came along, and the 2 bottom ones shared just how frustrating it was to use a system when the students didn't want to use it and it was too hard. And the top ones came along and went, oh, well, we're finding it's working really well. We've been able to do this cool stuff and using forums and all sorts of things. By getting them together, these 2 polar extremities were able to see things from each other's viewpoints. And our IT manager, right in the middle of the conversation, was able to see the things that were working and the things that weren't. So he was able to start tailoring the system to support the ways it was being used. Yes, it was the statistics that helped him isolate the particular people to bring together. But I'm really keen to point out, he never told these people how they were brought together. Gareth, that's exactly what I'm talking about by creating custom roles. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat while I keep the narrative going as well. So creating a statistics type role for senior management is perfect as long as they understand how to use it. And I'm sure senior management definitely will tell you they understand how to use it, but you may want to point them in the direction of some of these publications anyway, just in case. What I love about that story is that, yes, we had to use the quantitative statistics to identify who in the organisation to bring together and have that conversation with, but it's the conversation itself that helps that peer review process, that helps strengthen how Moodle's being used. And the IT manager was very humble about this. He hasn't assumed any knowledge of pedagogy or educational practice. He's just said, I want to make it work the best way it can for you. By contrast, I've come into an institution where they were very keen on a particular pedagogy, which wasn't working at all well for their purposes. And that's an example of twisting the statistics to support something that's just not going to work. And if I'm being vague with details, it's because I'm very mindful of not revealing identities of clients inadvertently. So I hope you'll bear with me in my kind of storytelling mode. So the image I've got up here at the moment, Influencer, The Power to Change Anything. This is a fantastic book that I would highly recommend. The multiple authors here have been involved in change management and influence research for the last 30 years. I will caution you, it's extremely American, which can be a little bit hard to take in points from an Australian perspective. I suspect we tend to be just a little less jump in and try it than Americans on this particular subject. But what I love about it is it's broken down influence into 6 fields. Now that story about our IT manager, he's definitely gone and harnessed peer pressure because he's brought the 2 top end and the 2 bottom ends together so they can benefit from each other. And what we've noticed when we work with people across different organisations is the top end will usually pull the bottom up, not the other way around. There is research to substantiate those kind of claims. I'm happy to share links in the course afterwards for anyone who's interested. But what I also like about this grid, we can take that quantitative information and using a scaffold like this, we can start using it to build influence within our organisations. We can start looking at, is the change that we're trying to make, and for most of us it's either introducing Moodle or improving how it's used, is the change we're trying to make actually going to work? And if we haven't addressed these particular influence fields, chances are it's not. And oftentimes we'll overlook most of those fields inadvertently. So if we've got a structure, for example, and a lot of tertiary institutions suffer from this, research practice, very well rewarded, easily recognised. The number of publications you've got is a good way of checking whether or not you're doing quality research. Arguably, I don't necessarily agree with that statement, folks. But certainly there are institutional rewards for how many publications you get, how much quality research you're awarded with, whereas the rewards for teaching aren't quite so systematically built in. And what we're trying to encourage our teachers to do is use Moodle. If there's no structural rewards for it, then chances are using Moodle is not going to be staff's highest priority. Exactly, Teresa, research equals dollars. Teaching practice, it's harder to tie dollars to. And much harder to tie prestige to as well, let's be honest. Personally, I think teaching is a fantastic profession and I'm very glad to be a member of it, but it's hard for the people we work with to have that fully recognised. If our structural rewards aren't there, then the change we're trying to get happening is going to be harder to make happen. Likewise, if our social ability isn't there, so if we've introduced this wonderful system and then we've forgotten to tell everyone how to use it, and I know most of the people in here are going to say, but of course we train our staff. We make sure that we provide workshops and all this sort of thing. Most of you, I know your names, I know where you're from, so I know you would do that, but plenty of organisations we come across introduce this wonderful system and either forget to tell their staff that it's there or forget to give them any sort of training or support in how to use it. It may be that the staff are really keen to use it, but they have no idea where to get started, and Moodle is particularly difficult for this because it's got so many options built into it. It can be rather difficult sort of getting a feel for where to start. So what we're trying to do when we address that both social and personal ability, yeah, Laurelie, or they aren't allocated the time, which is just as bad. That would fall more into structural ability than into social or personal ability. I think, broadly speaking, Gareth, yes, we can agree we need to give staff quality time to learn properly, but we also need to make sure that that time is efficiently built and effectively used. So just telling them, oh, well, you've got an hour's release to go and play with Moodle doesn't actually scaffold them into it. And I could go off on a right royal tangent on that one as well. That's a problem we deal with a lot when we're consulting with various clients. Properly structured, see, we could argue for ages on how properly structured could be defined. I think what struck me about this story not long after I started, though, was that for those of you who haven't come across Diffusion of Innovations, I recommend reading it. Basically, Everett Rogers was one of the fathers of tracing innovation and how it gets taken up and applied. And within this book, he talks about various levels or groups of innovators. When I first came across this story from Julian, I said to him, but you've taken the top two and the bottom two. I can kind of understand bringing the bottom two along because they'll want to join in and catch up with their peers if there's that positive energy there. But you've taken the top two. The top two are usually the experimenters. They're the kind of far out people who tinker with everything. And Everett Rogers makes a claim that, you know, those first initial people who take up a change, usually if they take it up, you're doomed because they're too far out for everyone else to even consider following. It's the people that come after them that you really want to get hold of. They're trusted. They're already part of a social network. So when you're looking at these reports within your own organisation, I'd combine it with looking for the innovators and the trusted network members within your organisation as well. And they're not necessarily the hierarchical structure that you're looking at. Different institution, another story from my own experience, we looked at changing to Moodle with one of the clients we worked with. And they were very much aware of influence structures and social networks. They wanted to make really sure that they grabbed everyone who could possibly support this and got them all on board. So they found They're model people, Moodle modelers, model Moodlers. They grabbed hold of them and went, we'll offer you extra training if you volunteer for this, knowing full well that the people who would want to volunteer would probably be the tinkerers, but hopefully they would also be the key network staff. Unfortunately, our executive hierarchy got hold of this notion and went, well, if there's extra training involved, we want to make sure we get our key people in that. So instead of looking at the social network, it devolved back to the structural network that was already in place at the organisation. Entirely the wrong people for trying to forward this change to Moodle system, and it killed it entirely. This is why I say when you're looking at the networks involved in your organisation, you need to look closer than the structural hierarchy. Executive staff will tend to go, it should be structural. That's what we have a structure in place for. But look a little closer, because you want the people that staff naturally go and knock on the door of. It's those people who will have a coffee with you and go, oh, look, I discovered this new thing where if you turn on completion recording, you can make sure things are released to students in time. Those kind of staff members that everyone else relies on implicitly are the people you want to get on site and help you build a Moodle site that works. The other thing I love about both stories is they kind of revolve around the social networks I was just talking about, but they also revolve around the sense of informality. And you need that. If you're going to have Moodle successfully rolled out in an institution, if you're going to impact teaching practice in any sort of positive way, you have to be building informal relationships with the people that matter. And those people are the teachers. And from a teacher's perspective, the people who impact what you can do in a Moodle site are the system administrators. Those two groups of people have to be talking to each other effectively, otherwise it just doesn't work. And the disconnect between the two, I've seen at several institutions we've worked with across the last 12 months, and it can be quite a chasm in some organisations, and in others it's just, well, I stick my head around the corner and I ask him for help and I get it. That's fantastic. Exactly, Gareth. Micromanagement is the death knell of any successful Moodle site. I guess what I'm encouraging you to do is, by all means, use this statistical data. It's fantastic. It's really rich data, but combine it with having a coffee with people. Don't get too formal and rigid about using the knowledge that's provided for you. Make sure you keep that human touch with things. Okay, so I don't like doing stand and deliver presentations. I do them under duress. If you want to talk more about learning, you've got some contact details there for me. I would love to join any of you for a coffee anytime you happen to be in the Sydney neighbourhood. But right now, we've got, and I did have a clock here, I've now lost it. Always wonderful. Right now, we've got about 20 minutes left of presenting time, which is kind of what I wanted. I would love to turn this over for a little bit more of a discussion. For those of you who are more interested in reading than in viewing presentations, the PDF is there. I encourage you to download it. I'll also put a link to it from the course area though, so if you're running low on time, more than welcome to download it from there. What I'd love to do now is kind of open up, for those of you who have microphones, welcome to have more of an open discussion here about how you've successfully or otherwise rolled out Moodle and impacted or influenced teaching practice at your own organisations. For those of you who I've terrified with that last comment, you feel free to flee now. No offence will be taken. But if you'd like to have a go at the microphone and you've got one with you, just let me know in chat and I'll switch the audio over to you. I tell you what, nothing silences a room like asking for participation. I did kind of spring it on you all, I know. For those of you who are just coming across reports for the first time, I mentioned that I've been in Bhutan this last week. The group that I was working with, 2 members very kindly offered to join with me over the next 12 months in a case study on how using reports in Moodle can change teaching practice. Gareth, I'll come back to that question in just a moment. So if any of you are currently teaching at the moment, or if you're system administrators and you'd like to have a play with reports at your own institution, I would love to start collecting some of that information, because I think part of the problem with this particular presentation is there's no hard evidence of the positive impact reports can have. I come from a tertiary academic background, so I gravitate towards researching and finding out more. For those of you who'd like to participate and get a little more concrete information, please do let me know. You've got some contact details there. You can also let me know through the course pages. I will set up either a feedback activity or something similar to collect some information, because I don't want to let it die just at this point. There's a lot more that could be done here. Okay, Natalie, can you bear with me a second? I'll just answer Gareth's question. Reports in general, there's a lot that's happening with developing more reports for Moodle, and in 2.3, I've had a sneak peek at a custom reports module that allows teachers to choose which information they want to pull from reports. So to my mind, I can see reports being configured a lot more granularly, so we pull out exactly the information we want to know. For example, I've pointed out a couple of times with these reports that they don't actually tailor down to which roles we're seeing in the course. I think that would be a fantastic way to go with it. So as administrators and as teachers, we can see at a glance whether courses are busy because a teacher is constructing in there, or courses are busy because students are being active and doing stuff in there. So I hope that answers your question, Gareth. I've offered to turn the mic over, and I don't want to be a hog now, so I'm going to turn over to Natalie for a second. Bear with me, Natalie. This is the first time I've done it. Yes, data mining, absolutely.
Hi, I hope my bandwidth is enough to support me having a microphone. Let me know if it's too annoying. I went to a session about using Google Analytics to get better reporting, so this one complements it nicely. And in Moodle 1.9, somewhere along the line, the cron job stopped working, the reports stopped working, and our requests to have it addressed didn't get heard by anybody who had time to do anything about it. And we've recently got reporting in Moodle 2, so it's very exciting to have it back. And because we haven't had it for a long time, nobody quite knows the power of it, and not many people are using our Moodle 2 course yet, so I'm yet to really use these statistics. What I did in the meantime was I just put out a survey and asked teachers a series of questions to try to figure out who is actually using Moodle. And the results have come back in quite different to people's perceptions, because we seem to be running about 5 different types of courses. There's the full-time developers who are making online passive courses, which are the snail mail version, technology version of snail mail, just sending out assignments and email me back the Word document when you're finished. But there's a lot of other teachers who are quietly exploring different ways of using Moodle, and there is a lot more of them, and they're very quiet. So it's great to have these tools to try to find them. And now that we're about to release Moodle 2 in July, we're getting a lot of influence from people who've never actually probably looked at Moodle or used it, to create a one template style, one course fits all shared. And it's not the picture I have of Moodle, and it's hard to communicate that to people who've never used it. So I suppose I'm asking your your ideas of the different types of delivery and the different types of layouts and that diversity and what's
Okay, so I'm hoping people can hear me. Can I get someone to give me a bit of feedback through the chat and just let me know? Ah, fantastic. I think what Natalie was kind of driving towards there was how can we use reports to influence teaching practice at that kind of ground level, and the question she asked through chat before was along those lines as well. When you've got teachers using a course as more of a repository space, how do we influence that and change what's possible? And the short answer is with great difficulty. The longer answer is often by showing them what's possible and showing it to them in such a way that it's becomes small steps, which is what our RT manager did in the anecdote I told before. You know, the idea that you bring together peers who show the extremities of what's possible. That comes from many times of hearing that similar sort of question, Natalie. What I've found through training is a lot of people will come in with a particular mindset of how Moodle can be used, and it's often, look, just show me how I get my PDF and PowerPoints up there. And that's fine. We're very careful to make sure that we don't criticize people for just starting by putting up resources, because that's often the first starting point. What we do try and challenge them with is, okay, if you had a face-to-face classroom, you wouldn't walk in and just put down a textbook and walk back out. And yet that's exactly what they do when they come online. And it can oftentimes take that kind of visual example to try and point out to them just exactly what it is they're doing when they come online. They just don't see it. Then it starts to be, okay, how do we step into ways of getting activity happening around these resources? And I find what works best from my perspective is combining those reports with an example of what can be done. So it's no good using reports if all they're doing in their course is providing resources, because they'll never actually see what else is possible. It's a case of what you see is all there is. I've only got reports in there, so reports are working wonderfully well because everyone's clicked. Sorry, I've only got PDFs in there. They're working fantastically well because everyone's clicked to open them. If we've got nothing to compare it to, we can't see how well they're working. Then you need to bring some of that creativity to the front of, okay, so Moodle's got this jam-packed list of activities that we can bring in. What resources have you got here? What are you trying to achieve with them? How would you approach this if you were face-to-face in the classroom? And that's part of what I love about my job. I get to bring in examples of what's possible. Unfortunately, I don't often get to stay around long enough to see how it gets used at the institution, but I do love coming back 6 to 8 months later and seeing what they've done. And some of our clients I get to do that with, which is fantastic. Teresa, that's exactly the idea behind using these reports, is finding those examples of, and finding them quickly, because remember, our administrators often don't have the luxury of time. Yeah. How do you find what a good teacher is, Teresa? Can I switch the mic over to you and get you to elaborate on that a little bit more? Oh, no, Mike. That's a really bad oversight. Yes, we all like twisting teachers' arms. No, just joking. No, we probably don't either. That's quite right. So hopefully what you've picked up from this presentation is at an institutional level, there's a great way to see what's happening across your site. Now, word of mouth is a really good way of finding out what's happening in your institution as well, but you have to be connected to your staff to do that. And yes, they can be spotted by observation, but what happens if you're an online administrator and you don't see your teachers? We have some RTOs who are in this category. Their teachers are scattered all across the nation. The system administrator is based in Sydney. Very, very little face-to-face time. So they really need a way of being able to identify what's happening in their site. Similarly, some of the larger tertiary institutions, yes, they may be within a kilometre of each other, the system admin and the teachers, but it doesn't mean they get up out of their chairs and actually go wandering to find each other. In fact, and I say this with my partner being a PHP programmer, so any geeks and nerds amongst us, please don't take offence. My experience of IT staff is they're quite happy to stay in their chairs in their offices if it's at all possible. In fact, my partner has been known to try and barricade the door against teachers. And that's exactly it. There are heaps of people doing great stuff, but there's no way for you to see it. Don't come to see me either. Don't leave a message, we will not respond. Oh, pardon me, folks, I'm sorry. Are there any questions around this presentation that I can kind of answer at this point? Yeah, this is true, Gareth. I've worked with techies that are both types. My partner on a bad day would try and barricade the door, but most of the time he was the type that would go and wander around the institution looking for the teachers. And actually he kind of inspires a fair bit of what I do. He's a wonderful person to work with. So we had the poll before, how many people have actually used these kind of reports before. I've kind of focused in this presentation. Ah, Gareth, you've got both ends. You're a very rare breed. I've kind of focused on course overview reports in this particular presentation, but I'm keen to kind of get some feedback on how many of you have used the activity reports within courses as well, or encouraged your teachers to do the same to see what the students are doing. I'm very selfish with these presentations. I often do them just to find out more from the community about what's happening. I share and gather at the same time. Natalie, which one did you start with? Or did you start with just one? Optional sessions, Teresa? That's very true. We're all too busy. And this is kind of why I like the idea of tapping a couple of select people on the shoulder and going, hey, would you like to have a coffee? Fair call, Gareth? So it's more a matter, Teresa, of your staff being motivated to want to know how to use Moodle effectively, and if they turn up, then they'll find out. Very cool. So have you looked much at the informal networks that they're already using? It's a bit sad, but it's common enough that it's when a student says, oh, I couldn't access the assignment, or I did submit the assignment, that we actually go looking for information to prove it one way or another. Oh, you're most welcome, Gareth. And the evolution into a Moodle consultant is a really fun trip. I highly recommend it. Staff always lie too. It's fantastic, Teresa. Absolutely, Shane. Professional people, that's what we're after. That's the trick, Teresa, which is why I'm kind of pointing out the staff will go and get help from someone within their faculty. I've seen it happen time and again, and they'll often trust those people more than the really well-informed, knows what they're talking about IT person. Um, it's trying to find those kind of keystone people within the organisation. If you can find them, they're invaluable. And I must admit, I watched as my partner actually went looking for those people. He would just go walking up and down the halls with a cup of coffee in his hand. Yeah, funding can be a big one. Sorry, I'm kind of relating stories of my partner now, but I used to go and have lunch with him. We worked at the same organisation for a while, and I'd go and have lunch with him, and nothing was more infuriating than discovering he'd gone walkabout right about lunchtime. And I know I would find him walking up and down the aisles of various schools and faculties with a cup of coffee in his hand. The coffee would often be completely empty. It was a pretense for just walking around casually and sticking his head in going, "Hi, how you going?" And finding the people screaming about Moodle. Yeah, gas, absolutely. Oftentimes when we start trying to formalise those networks, we kind of get beaten by the structures already in place in our organisation. It's really frustrating. I guess what I admired about my partner was that he completely ignored the structures that were in place. He told his boss, I'm going wandering for an hour, and that was it. There was no further explanation. And to his boss's credit, there was no further request for explanation either. Absolutely, Shane. That's pretty much what this is about. It really helps when you've got HODs or managers who actually understand the soft skills, the people skills that are required to get change happening. The IT manager anecdote I retold was possible because his manager was happy to go, "I trust you, you do what you need to do." And that's a very rare thing. What I'm hoping to do by researching it further is actually provide enough hard evidence for those kind of executive people to go, "This is a good idea, we have to do it." That's a great idea, Natalie. Library being so central to everything, they're often great staff to have on board. They're often really overworked as well, which is why they can get a bit frustrated. Okay, folks, are there any other questions or comments that you want to wrap up with? Yeah, me too, Gareth. I try and make it easier for them by pointing out how things could be different. I'm accused of being an evangelist from time to time. Teresa, was that an autocorrect? Thank you, Gareth. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Again, folks, I admit I'm being quite selfish here, but for those of you who would really like to help me get some hard evidence for this, please get in touch with me. Thanks, Christina. Not autocorrect, just a random typo.
Hey Lindy, Shane here, just jumping in to say thanks so much for sharing all your wisdom and experiences with everybody here today. And yes, you are a wonderful, bubbly person with lots to share, so really love having you share it there. Cool, thanks.
Alrighty, thank you very much, folks. Thank you, Shane.
Not saying I want to kill the conversation, by the way. People want to keep talking, that's great.
I'm happy to hang around here for as long as it takes. Hopefully I can drum up some case studies.
There's
See,
35 minutes until
Sorry, Shane?
Gavin Hendricks starts his one, so go for it.
Cool, cool. See you at Moodle, Teresa. Hopefully see you there too, Wendy. Bye. Jane, I caught part of your pirate presentation earlier today. It was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing it. They have a hard time trying to keep me stuck behind a table. I keep escaping. I like talking to people too much. Run away. I'm actually presenting at Moodle this year, so it'll be really good. Why would it not be well received, Jane? It was a fantastic presentation, a really cool idea. Made it fun. Fun things are always engaging. That's right, Wendy. Arr! What does that make Shane, Wendy? Fair enough. You got a microphone, Wendy?
Hello. Me? I have now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. How you doing?
Hello. Oh, you can hear. How exciting! It's very exciting. I made it all the way through a whole presentation.
Is that the first presentation you've made it all the way through?
Oh, not exactly. I've had to obviously been on duty looking at them, but I usually have to flick between two at a time, you see. This was the first one I was actually able to watch just one person presenting.
Oh, the luxury.
And it was actually very exciting. It was very
Okay.
exciting. I'm not really a three-screen person.
No, I'm not either. I manage with two. Three is getting a bit much.
So
I think that
Bhutan
went
was
rather
good?
well. Oh, Bhutan is absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful. I did mean to explain or excuse myself more for not being present at iMoot for the last 3 days, but yes, Bhutan was fantastic.
Oh no, that's awesome.
Sorry?
And you obviously learnt a lot there. You learnt a lot
I'm
there.
having real trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry, did you learn a lot there?
Yes, I learned heaps
Good.
about Bhutanese culture, about what food not to eat, about research methods, about various teaching conditions around the world, which was quite amazing. We had a couple of people in our paper group who have been trying to build a maths curriculum for Nauru, and it's just a horror story.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, obviously no one likes to hear a horror story, but it was really good background information for just how different areas are handling education, and some are doing it much better than others.
Yeah.
Bhutan's only
Oh,
just
yeah.
getting started, and it's got such a lot of opportunity and such a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong.
Yeah, I was surprised when I heard you were going to an IT conference up in Bhutan, but there you go.
It wasn't an IT conference, it was a teachers' conference.
Oh, even better, because we love teachers. Not that I dislike IT people.
God, I do.
That could get me in trouble.
No, I enjoy this kind of IT, teaching about systems that help teaching, but I'm not much of a geek, I'm afraid. I'm conversant in Doctor Who. That's about the extent of my geekiness.
Each day I get worse and worse, more geeky as I go along.
It's inevitable. The geek.
I know, it's a bit frightening. Well, I probably aren't. I'm not coming to Moodle.
Okay.
I might be.
I would really love to see you
Sounds
there.
very strange, doesn't it?
We don't, I guess. I know it's an extra
Well,
cost.
I don't
I thought you were fantastic at
I don't particularly want to come, but there wasn't enough space for me anyway. But the travel over is a bit of a hassle and stuff. But I'd like to go over and talk about the school moot.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, I was going to go over and talk about the school moot. Stuff like that. So yeah.
I think that would be awesome.
Well, I should scamper. I know, that's what I think. But who knows, I might get there or just get you guys to do it for me. Well, I'm going to get going, so thanks so much for presenting. That was awesome.
That's my pleasure. I'll be
And I'll
back
see
on
you
at 10
online
tonight.
soon.
Alrighty.
I won't.
Good night.
I'll be putting children to bed. Okay. See you, Lindy.
All good.
Bye.